Spread the word of Islam. Oh, fortunate one, paradise must be won. Paradise must be won. Each day and each night, through darkness and through light, cry it out to the world. Spread the word. Spread the word of Islam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahi wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Today we have with us Sheikh and Professor Al Najjar, Chairman of this Committee of Scientific Notions of the Quran and the Sunnah. Firstly, Sheikh, I welcome you to the show. How is everything? How was your journey here? Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I would like to start off asking you to give a brief background of yourself, where you were brought up, raised, and also how did you get into the field of Quran and science?
I begin by praising Allah, all glory be to Him, and by seeking His blessings and mercy to be with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and by greeting you and our viewers in our Islamic way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be with you all. By the grace of Allah, I was brought up in a religious family that kept Islam alive in the house. We had a big library of Islamic books, and by the grace of Allah, I was taught in a number of schools where Islam was always present. My primary education was mainly during the Second World War, and we lived in Cairo, and we had to suffer from the bombardments of the German planes to Cairo, and we realized the dangers of such types of wars at a very early age. Then during my secondary schooling, cropped out the problem of Palestine and the occupation of Palestine by the Jews. And this drove me really to be interested more in Islamic issues. And I went to Cairo University in 1951 with a complete background on Islam. Yet I found that the materialistic attitude of many people in the university was completely different from the training I lived under. And the main argument was that in as much as the Europeans have excelled in the area of science and technology by leaving religion behind, we have to leave our religion behind so that we can excel in the area of science and technology. And of course, I had to defend Islam from the scientific point of view. And I had to prove to these materialistic attitudes that Islam does not defy science and technology. And what happened in the West was a struggle between the clergy of the church and scientists. We never had such a struggle in the history of the Islamic civilization. And the Islamic civilization was probably the most integral civilization we came to know of. It was the lengthiest and most integral civilization because it was the only civilization we know of that combined this world and the world to come in one equation. And during these discussions, I came to be interested in the area of science and Quran and Sunnah, to prove to people from the Quran and from the traditions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that there is no contradiction whatsoever. On the contrary, Quran substantiates thinking and free thinking, and substantiates meditation into the universe and into oneself to see one of the multifarious aspects of the greatness of the Creator himself. That's how I got into that area.
How have your responses been? How have people responded?
Of course, at the beginning, there were lots of opposition, and many people thought that I'm doing the wrong thing. But by the grace of Allah, after a number of years, people came to realize that this is the right path, and I'm doing the right thing. First of all, because the Quran contains more than 1,000 cosmic verses. And the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, are abounded by many cosmic verses and cosmic hadiths, sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And these verses in the Quran and in the Sunnah cannot be understood in terms of the Arabic language alone. We have to add the scientific dimension so that we can understand these verses properly. And the Quran came down to us to be understood, not just to read it as a blessing from Allah, although this is true, but to understand it so that we can react accordingly. So that we as Muslims, we have to understand these verses. And as I said, cosmic verses in the Quran and Sunnah cannot be clearly understood in terms of the Arabic language alone. I have to add the scientific dimension so that we can understand these verses. And if we can understand them fully, we can easily prove to ourselves and to others as well that the Quran, a book revealed more than 14 centuries ago to an unlettered prophet, peace be upon him, in an unlettered society, has actually preceded all the acquired knowledge by giving very many scientific facts that were not known at the time of revelation of the Quran. And this precedence in itself is a testimony that the Quran cannot be the work of man, and a living testimony for the correct prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
As you have said, the Quran is filled with ayat and verses filled with Quranic miracles. Can you give an example of some of your favorite scientific miracles?
You see, for example, one of the most critical areas facing science is the area of creation. Creation with its three dimensions: creation of the universe, creation of life, and creation of man. If we take only the area of the creation of the universe, we can see clearly that the glorious Quran has covered that area in 5 verses that spell out many of the scientific facts that came to our knowledge only in the last few decades of the 20th century. The first verse speaks about Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. Verily, the firmament we have built with great might, and verily we will keep expanding it. And the expansion of the universe came to our knowledge only in the first third of the 20th century, 1935-36. And many scientists did not believe in it until probably the end of the 20th century. For the Quran to spell out this fact that we are living in a steadily expanding universe is a precedent that can testify to its divine nature, because nobody at the time of revelation of the Quran knew anything about that at all. Astronomers of today say that if you can go back against time, this whole universe will collapse into a singularity that is so small that all the laws of physics and quantum physics cannot stop working, and as if it is to nothingness. And from that singularity came a cloud of smoke. From this smoke, the earth and the firmaments were created. And the Quran reads, ثم استوى إلى السماء وهي دخان فقال لها وللأرض ائتيا طوعا أو كرها قالتا أتينا طائعين. That Allah, in a way that suits his nature, has established this universe while it was just smoke, and he ordered both the earth and the firmaments to come into being. Willingly or unwillingly, they came in willing obedience. And scientists speak about the Big Bang theory, that this explosion that created that huge cloud of smoke, they call it the Big Bang. And the Quran speaks about something that can substantiate this theory by saying, أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Having the unbelievers seen that both the earth and the firmaments were a single entity when we broke them asunder, and we have created out of water every living being. These are scientific notions that were not known to anybody at the time of revelation of the Quran or for many centuries afterwards. And for the book to spell these facts so beautifully and so clearly and so eloquently is a testimony that this book cannot be the work of man. It's the word of the Creator in its divine purity, and can testify to the correct prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Allah sallam. And also just a question from a personal, I just came back from Umrah.
Yes.
And the Zamzam there. I mean, there's science behind the purity of Zamzam, is there not?
You see, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is quoted to have said, Zamzam is the best well on earth, and its water is the best water on earth. Zamzam khayru bi'r wa ma'uha khayru ma'. And he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is quoted to have said, khayru ma'in ala wajhi al-ard ma' Zamzam. The best water on the surface of the globe is water of Zamzam. And Zamzam as a well is a miracle by itself, because Mecca is built on massive block of igneous and metamorphic rocks. And these igneous and metamorphic rocks are highly impervious. There is no porosity. And usually groundwater is stored in highly porous and highly permeable rocks. For a well to come out in such type of rock and keep flowing almost 4,000 years non-stop is a miracle by itself that can testify to the holiness of the place.
SubhanAllah. I think we've had enough time for now, so join us after the break. Inshallah, I'll see you then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Spread the word of Islam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the show with me, your host and Sheikh and Professor Al Najjar. And also, Sheikh, I'd like you to comment on the book by Maurice Biles, The Bible, Quran and Science.
Maurice Bucaille, may Allah bless his soul, was a French medical doctor who came across the treatment of some of the pharaonic mummies, and he could prove easily that one of these mummies was killed by drowning, because he found lots of salt in his body. So he told everybody around himself that this man was killed drowning. People around him told him that we know that. I asked, how could you know that? I only found that out when I opened the throat of this mummy. They said this is the Pharaoh of Moses, and the Quran tells us that he was killed drowning. So this drove him to read the Quran, and being from a scientific background, he concentrated on scientific notions in the Quran, and he wrote that wonderful book, La Bible, le Coran et la Science, the Bible, the Quran and Science. And he divided the book in two halves. In the first half, he showed clearly that every scientific notion in the Old Testament is absolutely wrong in the light of the present day information. In the other half, he showed clearly that every scientific notion in the Quran is scientifically very precise and very correct in the light of the present scientific knowledge. And this drove him to write that book. And a few years later, he embraced Islam.
As you mentioned, Islam was at the peak of science at one time in society, but now rather we find Islam is at the bottom of science. What advice can you give the audience and me, myself?
Well, the struggle between right and wrong, between truth and falsehood, is one of the symptoms of our time, of our life. And after 10 centuries of scientific prominences in the Islamic world, the West started to fight against this Khilafah until they crushed the Islamic Khilafah at the beginning of the 20th century in 1924. They occupied most of the Muslim lands. They have pushed the Islam completely away from the seat of power and propagated the materialistic attitude of the current civilization. And because of this, the Muslim world has been split into more than 62 entities, countries, smaller or large. This has dissipated the resources of the Muslim Ummah, has created lots of frictions amidst these little entities, and still the West is trying to break down the Muslim nation into smaller and smaller fragments. And by this fragmentation, we couldn't keep pace with the scientific developments, and with the domination of the materialistic attitude by most of the ruling bodies in the Muslim world, Islam have been pushed aside, and because of this we have become backward and we lost our leadership.
So is there any advice that you can give to us how we can regain this leadership? And
well, the main advice I can give is that Muslims have to realize that we are living in a world of big agglomerations of human beings, like the United States, the United Europe, China, India. So we have to reunite. And we are different races. The only bondage that did unite us in the past is Islam. So we have to go back to Islam, go back to Quran and Sunnah, and try to work out a plan for unifying the Muslim world. And this is the only way that we can come on the stage once more and can lead the world, which is in dire need for Islam.
As a student of knowledge myself, where can I gain information about Quran and science, and how can I study the Quran and science in further detail?
Well, I have a site on the internet under my name, and this site contains a wealth of information in that area. I've got at least 500 articles. I've got 3 large encyclopedias, Islam and Science, in 6 volumes, and 4 other volumes are in the press currently. This is arranged subject-wise: the firmament in the glorious Quran, the earth in the glorious Quran, plants in the glorious Quran, animals in the glorious Quran, human embryology in the glorious Quran, man in the glorious Quran after development, after the embryological stage. I have 4 other volumes in press. I also have 4 volumes covering the scientific verses in the Quran from Al-Fatiha to An-Nas. And I have made an introduction with complete exegesis of the Quran in 1 volume, introduction to these 4 volumes, called Fi Nur al-Quran. And I've got 3 books on scientific notions in the Sunnah. And all this has been translated into English, so you can read it in Arabic, in English. And I've got articles on my site in the 8 different languages.
Can you give some more examples of Quran and science, but not from Quranic perspective, but rather from the Sunnah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
You see, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is quoted to have said, لا يركب البحر إلا حاج أو معتمر أو غاز في سبيل الله فإن تحت البحر نارا وتحت النار بحرا. Nobody should ride the sea except for a major mission like pilgrimage or Umrah or fighting in the way of Allah or gaining knowledge or spreading Islam or exchanging relationship with other countries. So he said, riding the sea is a dangerous mission. It should never be taken except for a major issue. And he explained why he said that. He said, below the sea there is fire, and below the fire there is water. And commentators on the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, couldn't understand how could be water and fire, how could they coexist? Water quenches fire, and fire evaporates water. How could water and fire coexist and keep that relationship? Only very recently, when science went down to the bottoms of oceans, they found that all oceans of our time are actually established on deep rift systems. And the rifts are so deep, their depth ranges between 65 kilometers and 150 kilometers. The thickness of the oceanic crust is only 5 to 8 kilometers. Once you penetrate this, you pass by a zone of weakness, wherein the rocks are found in a semi-molten stage. So this magma oozes out in millions of tons and keeps all oceans of the time physically set on a blaze. And the huge quantity of water in the oceans cannot quench that blaze completely. And that hot blaze at the temperature of more than 1,000 degrees centigrade cannot evaporate that water completely. And this is one of the living testimonies to the correct prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him, because he never rode the sea in his lifetime even for once.
And what was your first, the dawah experience, when you said to yourself, I have to stop studying Quran and science, and now I have to let the people know about the miracles of the Quran and how Quran and science and Sunnah all links together?
You see, you have to have a field of specialization, either in science area or even in the humanities. And you have to excel in that field. You have to prove yourself in that field. And then you have to study the Arabic language. You have to study the rules of indulging with the tafsir. And then you have to study the rules and regulations of dealing with this process of proving science in Quran and Sunnah. And then you go ahead, read the Quran, and you will come up with 1 or 2 ayahs, 3 ayahs, 10 ayahs in your own field. And with this, you can look into the ayah in a way slightly different from what the early commentators of the Quran did. And this, you can give a new outlook of this verse, and this is how we can discover the endless nature of the Quran, as the Prophet described it when he said, إن هذا القرآن لا تنتهي عجائبه ولا يخلق ولا في الرد. The Quran, its miracles can never come to an end, and it will never look old the more you read it.
Sheikh, when was your first time when you started preaching Islam through a scientific view, when you started letting people know about Islam and science?
Well, I think I went to Britain early in 1960, and at that time the Britishers had a big quarrel with the Egyptians over the 1956 war, when Britain, France, and the Zionist occupiers of Palestine invaded Egypt. And of course, the feeling was very bitter against Egyptians and Arabs and Islam in general. And of course, I had to go into long debates with these people to make them understand that Islam has nothing to do with these conflicts. You see, they have to read Islam not through the conflicts, but through its original sources, the Quran and Sunnah. And I started lecturing about Islam in Britain, and I went into debates, long debates with Christians and Jews. And then in 1976 or 77, I had a sabbatical leave, which I spent in the United States. I went to UCLA in Los Angeles, and there I went into a trialogue, actually, between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, with 2 of the leading professors of comparative religion in the university. And this went first in the university, and then it was on television, and was broadcasted in most of the American TV channels. So I got the name of being capable of dialoguing with non-Muslims. I went on traveling all over the place, trying to give Islam from a new perspective, from a scientific point of view, which very few people can do that.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for the information you have shared with us, Sheikh. We've come to an end for this episode. Inshallah, join us for the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Spread the word, oh man. Spread the word of Islam. Oh, fortunate one. Paradise must be won. Paradise must be won. Each day and each night. Through darkness and through light. Cry it out to the world. Spread the word.